or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. This is the second opportunity you're going to have to spend some time with me tonight because just finished the show there with Tom Bennett and Emma Clark looking at isolation in schools. So thanks very much if you decided to stick around for this. I'm sure it'll be absolutely fantastic and well worth it. We're going to be talking tonight about coaching in schools with a specific reference to Coaching WalkThru's, the new book, which is here. How beautiful does it look? From Hachette Learning, authored by Oliver Caviglioli and Matt Stone, and also Tom Sherrington, who isn't here tonight, but is part of the team behind this wonderful publication. Now, before we do anything, there we go. It's back there. Before we do anything, introductions, gents. Do you want to do a brief introduction, starting with you, Matt, of who you are and what you're doing here?
Perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Stone. I'm Director of Education at Teaching WalkThru's and co-author of Coaching WalkThru's. I've spent 17 years teaching English, the back end of my in-school career as a leader, leading on teaching and learning and professional development. And that's where I first got interested in coaching and developing coaching systems in schools. Fortunately for me, I found the WalkThru's team and the WalkThru's toolkit when the first book, the Teaching WalkThru's book, was made available, and that made a massive difference to my work as a coach and the systems that we were trying to build. And fortunately, my relationship with Tom and Oliver has grown from there, and I'm now a full-time member of the team. And this book was a real project for me, and something that I'm incredibly proud of. So I'm delighted to have a chance to speak to you about it this evening.
Brilliant. And Oliver?
Hi, I started teaching in 1976. Soon went from mainstream to special schools, and I've been a trainer and author and bits and pieces for 20 years. I was a head teacher for a special school, and one day I was leafing through. My architect father strangely had a whole collection of Reader's Digest books. Reader's Digest books, how to do crocheting, how to do it yourself, because they were just by far the best way to capture, codify, if you want, everyone's popular word, layout. And then one day I had the idea, wow, I could do that with teaching. So I was born the WalkThru's.
Yeah,
that I may bring in.
Don't ruin it, Oliver, because my first question was going to be about the WalkThru's. So the first thing I was going to ask you, go on.
No, I'm going to say, I just finished off my intro. My connection with coaching was I was involved with coaching 40 years ago when its first birth, from the human potential movement into adoption by the corporate world.
Wow. Okay, so we've got two fantastic experts here to discuss coaching in schools, but I wanted to ask, and I'll probably go to you, Oliver, on this one. First off the bat is, because you mentioned it, the WalkThru's obviously have been a series that have like crushed the world of education. You know, they've taken the world of education by storm. For anybody out there who doesn't know what they are, any of our listeners at Teachers Talk Radio who don't know what they are, what are WalkThru's?
In a sense, they're a collective mind of everything that the teaching profession had never been able to do before. It was kind of had an amnesia. They kept having to invent techniques every new generation. Nothing was ever captured. So it was like an archive of all the best techniques. And then when we looked at them, looking at the best way to depict them, you could present a wall of words, and you could make those wall of words that sound very academic. In every sentence, you've got at least 3 references. Rogers and Stone, 87. you know, that kind of stuff. So with my experience in the graphics world and seeing how the development of information graphics in business over the last 30 years, and I had the opportunity to work with those people and see how effective they were. And by the way, that involved PhDs who were at the beginning of Silicon Valley. So it's been really, really tested. So it was almost like an open goal, just have 5 steps, very concise verbal description, and each one has an image. So it's highly visual. And the visual is, spend a long time designing it. So it's not too detailed, because when I first did the prototypes, I drew the pupils and the teachers came back and said, "You've drawn blue V-necks, we have red crew necks." And I thought, okay, I got it. So it didn't have any of that kind of detail. But ironically, what that helps you do, that almost triggers the teacher's mind to project themselves and add the details. So they add their own context, which is like a mental simulation. So that's been like a whole different level why they're successful.
I mean, one of the things you have to say, I mean, I talked to Jamie Clark, former host of ours, and, you know, he was saying that, you know, for him, it had really inspired him with, you know, when he's gone on to do his one page and stuff, the style of walkthroughs, the way they've been formatted, it's almost become iconic. It's become like a legacy sort of imprint, if you want to say that. So yeah, I get totally what you're saying. Now, obviously, you've had lots of iterations of the walkthroughs in various different publications. This is one of them, isn't it? But you've had others, right? The one we're talking about today is focusing on coaching. So I wanted to, and Matt, maybe you can pick this one up first. I wanted to ask, why coaching? Why do you think this? Because it's very much on trend, right? In education. Yeah. So, and I don't say that in a negative way at all, by the way. I'm saying that it's the new kid on the block, if you want to say that, right? A little bit. So why have you decided to focus on coaching in this book? Why is coaching to you so important in schools?
Yeah, I think it's a fair observation that it's become a bit of a buzzword, particularly around the advent of instructional coaching. For me, it started while I was in schools, and you know, really we all. I mean, it's very easy to point to a formative moment, but for me, you know, working in a system where I was required to visit classrooms and give feedback to teachers in a kind of traditional way, and kind of stumbling into this situation that wasn't really effective. You know, finding that meeting with teachers after watching them for 60 minutes do their thing and reeling off a list of things that I liked and things I didn't like, and, you know, risking kind of the confrontation and getting their backs up, and then hoping that somehow they'd go and enact some of that feedback and do something that would happen as if by magic. And kind of a pent-up frustration kind of led to the point where I felt there had to be something better out there. There had to be a better way. So when I first started thinking about establishing and building a coaching system in my own school, it wasn't necessarily that I was looking for coaching. It was that I was looking for something else, something that made sense. And that led me to some of the great work. And I think we could quite happily say that lots of the work in Coaching WalkThru's is kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. Oliver kind of mentioned it's not a new concept. And, you know, I was have been massively influenced by the work of Jim Knight. And, you know, that was my first foray into coaching, was following Jim's work, following the impact cycle and seeing firsthand. I mean, this is, you know, I'm kind of a walking testimonial for this. I saw the transformation that it could have in a school to begin with, a school that desperately needed to develop systems to help teachers get stuck into improving teaching and learning. And it grew from there for me. So coaching was there before I found WalkThru's. I mean, I started early doors teaching, building a coaching system, and we were usually teach like a champion strategies, making our own strategies, as Oliver said, kind of part of this perpetual amnesia, inventing stuff to make it possible. And WalkThru's came along as this kind of perfect fit, this tool, this kind of playbook that covered such a broad aspect of teaching that made it a really good bedfellow for the type of work we were doing around coaching. and we've always spoken about that. So since I kind of got in contact with Tom and Oliver, we were early adopters of walkthroughs and integrating that into our coaching process. It was always a natural fit. It was always how we were talking about making the best of the material. So it isn't like, it isn't a case of, and I know this is not what you're saying, but it's not a case of we're jumping on a bandwagon and saying coaching's out there, so we're going to make this coaching. We're finding a language and we're finding a resource that enables teachers and schools to kind of systematize their work with walkthroughs in a way that we feel is just logical. And we hope the scope of coaching walkthroughs kind of extends a little bit beyond coaching. I see it also, it's a leadership book. It's about how to kind of facilitate and run and build great systems for professional development that include coaching, but also include other strands that I'm sure we'll talk about later, kind of training and the nature of kind of team-based practices and team-based processes in professional development. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a saturated area of education at the moment. There's lots out there. An aim for us was to kind of carve our own space in it, but it's very much a natural extension of what we've seen happening with our tools in the field. Working with schools and capturing that, it was an opportunity to kind of distill some of the wisdom kind of picked out from that field testing, and that's what we hope it does. It's a reflection of what we've seen happening in schools, as opposed to us kind of pontificating about what it should look like. I don't know if Oliver, if you want to kind of add to that.
Well, it's multi-layered. I think what you were describing when I was here, it's multi-layered. So when people keep using the word coaching, they assume it's just one thing, it's one layer, and then that's why they argue it should be just like this. But actually, it's multiple. You're talking about, the notes I've been writing down, one of the things underneath, all the actual layers part, you're talking about the personal part. So you've got to deal with the layers that professionals have. The emotional one, we're always fragile to receiving feedback, even if we're brave publicly saying, give me more feedback, the breakfast of champions. Actually, we're all fragile. There's the social aspect. You're my coach, you will speak to my boss. And there's the cognitive bit. I get overwhelmed when you're in my classroom. I can see that you're brilliant. If I just copy you, when you go 2 weeks' time, it all seems to disappear. I don't seem to have changed what I'm thinking. Then you've got the systemic level, as Tom Sherrington talks about, how can you unify the coaching sessions, department meetings, the inset sessions? They all seem to be disparate and fighting. And given that what schools suffer from is a lack of time, lack of energy, while we're doing multiple things going in different directions, Matt particularly's take on coaching is he brings those disparate elements together. So although we use the word coaching, it's kind of really broader. Well, it's the broadest possible interpretation of coaching.
That leads nicely actually onto my next little point, which was around what coaching actually is. Now, I know this whole book is about coaching, right? So we're going to delve into that. But I wondered just at the outset, maybe in a very sort of brief way, we could maybe try to define or identify what coaching actually is, as opposed to other forms of feedback or conversations that happen in schools between teachers and senior leaders.
Okay, I want to kick off here. So I'm a bit controversial. I personally don't know how schools can adequately answer that if they have no knowledge or, more importantly, experience of coaching outside of schools. So I was involved in an American organization that was the beginning. And if you look at Vicky Brock's book, Source Book of Coaching History, you'll see all the connections where it comes from and how it was initially used in business. So unless you know that, you can't really answer what is coaching, because you're really not in a position. So for a discipline, a profession like education, who talks about knowledge trumps everything, to then confidently talk about coaching where they don't have knowledge of the origins of coaching, like, I mean, why can't you see that? You can answer, what do you think coaching is in schools?
Yeah. And
that you can do.
Yeah, and I think I'll add to that, Oliver. I think in schools, for me, and certainly this was at the forefront of our thinking when we were producing coaching walkthroughs and in the work that we do, is we see coaching from the perspective of a technical pedagogical process. So what we're trying to focus on here is not executive coaching. We're not trying to, provide this kind of broader life coaching approach. We're trying to help teachers really make sense of what's happening in their classrooms. And part of that involves helping them notice things and kind of spot things and build their background knowledge around how learning happens and what great teaching looks like. Part of that, and this is where if I was tempted to go into a kind of a much more singular definition of what coaching is, I'd say provide them with ongoing social and practical support that enables them to actually make changes to their practice, to think about their practice and to enact practice, and then to provide them with everything they need to be able to build a really successful pedagogical repertoire that arms them with the tools necessary to be able to respond to situations really effectively as they arise in the classroom. And I think we've tried really hard to be very clear about that remit. That's what we're trying to support is how do we help teachers? How do we be really, really useful to teachers, not just by giving them words and making them feel great about themselves, but by giving them tools and helping them use those tools in a really effective way, so that there's an impact for them, but also for their students in the classroom.
So I wanted to ask, leading on from that, and we'll get, the next thing we're going to do is get into the book itself. And if anyone's joining us live, by the way, on LinkedIn or X or YouTube, then feel free to drop any sort of question or comment or anything else that you want to say in, and we'll try to bring it up on screen and definitely get involved in the conversation on TTR, because that's what we're all about. So I thought I'd drop that in before we go on. But I wanted to, in this sort of introductory section, if you like, I wanted to sort of put out there around this idea that in schools, and I don't know whether this is what you were touching on, Oliver, with what you were saying, is can coaching easily become a tick box thing that's maybe a little bit lethally mutated into something that it's not supposed to be? Is that sort of what you were saying, or am I barking up the wrong tree there?
That isn't what I was saying, but I don't think there's anything that can't be made into a performative tick box.
Yeah. Okay. Great. You're right, though. This book, right? Oh, go on.
Let me go back. I'm hesitant at the overuse of the word lethal mutation in education. When people all say the same thing so rapidly, I'm thinking there can't be a lot of thinking going on. So I don't know what they mean by lethal. Certainly, coaching in schools is a mutation of life coaching, executive life coaching in the 1980s. There's no doubt. But then again, I spent my teenage years as a serious athlete, and I was dealing with national coaches, and I was coached. And coaching in schools to me, more resembles sports coaching than it does life coaching. And just more thing about sports coaching, it was generally the trend that when a coach dealt with youngsters who didn't know anything, they were more like a teacher. They were very directive. Then when someone became a near international elite, then actually they were in conversation and they asked them how things were going. Are you okay for the next couple of months? How much do you need me? So in that sense, it's a mutation which is really useful. I don't readily attach the word lethal to it.
Oh, makes sense.
If anything's mutated and it's surviving, by definition, it's not lethal, is it?
Yeah. So anyway, the book, right? Here it is. Coaching Walkthru's. And when you go into the sort of contents page of this book, you've split it into very helpful sections. So we've got section 1, which is the why. We've got section 2, which is the how. we've got section 3, which is the what. Then we move on to scenarios at the end. So there's these various sections in it. And what we're going to do in the show tonight is we're going to pick some bits from each of these sections to try to illustrate what this book is all about and how it might be able to help you as a teacher or a leader in school who's maybe working with staff or your teachers to improve teaching across the school or to develop teaching across the school. So I wanted to start off with this why section, okay? And in this why section, there's lots in here, obviously, but it might be a good starting point actually to just ask you, why does coaching work?
Well, brilliant question. So is it okay if I start with that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so we can trace it back to some of the evidence that's been compiled around effective professional development. Coaching works partly because it enables the implementation of mechanisms that we know are likely to be successful in professional development. That's necessary, I suppose, but probably not sufficient on its own. The proof is in the implementation. So coaching should work, and coaching often can work. Sometimes coaching doesn't work, and that's likely to be down to kind of some element of implementation that hasn't quite landed. But we really like, and we write again in the why section about the mechanisms from the EEF and the kind of the core categories around building knowledge and motivating teachers and developing teaching techniques, and then providing time to kind of embed those techniques over time. And actually that as a framework, I think, is really robust and feels like it makes sense. And we see that kind of borne out in practice. What I'm always interested in regards to those categories and that piece of work is the idea of developing teaching techniques. It seems totally bizarre, but certainly in my own experience for a long time in teaching and professional development, like that was the missing piece. We could go down this kind of inset delivery route that lots of schools if not still do, certainly did, and we could talk about ideas and people can nod along and teachers could kind of feel like really inspired, I want to go and do this, but everything remains very abstract until you actually get it into the hands of the teacher. How do we translate these ideas into something that teachers say and do in the classroom, and importantly choose to say and do in the classroom when the door's closed and they're on their own and nobody's making them do it? And that's the real appeal for me of a coaching based approach, is that it manages some of those kind of residual tensions that exist within traditional models of do this, do that, the kind of imposition model, the compliance model, and it supports teachers to actually make good decisions and then to be able to enact and respond on those decisions because they've got good techniques that come through kind of the quality of instruction and feedback and practical support that a pedagogical coaching approach can support with. So I think that's a great starting point. Oliver, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that before we kind of dig into other aspects of the why section.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm not closely in touch with coaching in the way that Matt is in school, so I've always got a kind of distant point of view. So one sometimes seems a bit meta, but here goes. So you've only ever had one perspective as a human being, and of course, you're pretty intellectually you know that reality is made up of multiple perspectives from different levels, but phenomenologically, from your experience, you think, yeah, this is reality. I'm seeing it. So what coaching allows a professional to do, forget teaching for the time being, allows a professional to do is to learn of another perspective. And that loosens you up. I think that just loosens you up emotionally and cognitively. They both work together, just loosens you up to look for the possibility that you may not be seeing everything, or you may not be seeing it the most effectively. So a coach, because a coach sees many classrooms, one, they're skillful in how they talk and they don't dominate, etc. But their eyes, their vision is really developed, fine-tuned. And so they're able to see past some superficial aspect. I mean, the research on experts is they're not confused by superficial details. It's like their model, their theory is almost like an X-ray machine, because they're looking for something. And therefore they see things that a hurried teacher, under the stress of teaching, doesn't have the leisure to be able to see. And that's just invaluable. That's what I think. Then you need to deal with all the mechanisms of institutions and psychologies and etc. But that fundamentally is the human relationship.
That makes sense to me. I mean, that was just to capture, why does coaching work? Why is it important, I guess? And one of the things that you've said in the book, and one of the sections in this why section, is around the learning model in students, because you've said that it's vital to have a shared understanding of how learning happens. So again, just to work that into this conversation, how does learning happen?
Well, I mean, in the book, it's less about kind of defining or kind of asserting this is how it happens, and more about the importance of having a shared reference point that is familiar, recognizable to everybody involved in the process. So for us, we've kind of hung our hat on Dan Willingham's model of memory, and we feel that the implications of that for the classroom are significant and probably in the territory that every teacher should be familiar with. And I'm talking here about the implications being attention is difficult to hook and even harder to maintain, and working memory is limited and it's hard to regulate working memory for students in the classroom. That learning and meaning making are entirely invisible, so we have to elicit evidence of what's been learned, otherwise we don't know it's happening. That forgetting is a common necessary part of human cognition, and that bears out in the classroom. And these types of implications, regardless of what your reference point are, these are the types of things that we feel are really important in helping teachers design their pedagogical input and instruction. It's how do we create conditions in the classroom where we can support students in the best possible way to overcome some of those implications. And it kind of feels quite alien to think that teachers might be making those decisions in the moment on gut instinct alone, and not necessarily in a way that might be informed by some of the more credible ideas around how learning happens. So we've written about Tom and Oliver have written about the learning model extensively in the Teaching WalkThru's toolkit. We feel it's an important starting point for professional development, is a shared understanding of what learning looks like and how it happens, and why it's predisposed to kind of go wrong or be difficult for the students. And you probably noticed as well that we doubled down on this in Coaching WalkThru's, because the learning model's in there twice. So we have learning models for students, but then obviously in the context of professional development, where teachers are learners and teachers are thinking and teachers are trying to cognate around some of the core ideas, that the same limitations are at play. And so the way in which we design professional development, and this is why, I mean, you asked earlier why coaching, this is another reason why coaching and iterative coaching that kind of provides a momentum of support over time is powerful, because it supports teachers to kind of overcome their own limitations around cognition and the challenges of building iteratively on their own knowledge and experience, and revisiting and kind of sense making. So for us, I think that's such a common fixture of our work with schools now. And further on through the book, in the how section, we write a piece about training coaches, and I think that's a really useful starting point. What do we feel coaches and leaders or people who are involved in leading these processes need to know? And fundamentally, they need to know how learning happens to be able to talk about that and describe that and articulate what that might look like in terms of observable symptoms of success and struggle in the classroom. They need to have a really good understanding, a clear understanding of what great teaching looks like, whether that's a contextual interpretation designed and co-constructed with teachers, which we recommend in the book, or whether that's leaning into things like Rosenshine's principles. But they need to be able to describe and model those, and then they need to have coaching capacity. They need to have knowledge of how to facilitate teachers developing great habits in the classroom through as we talked about the mechanisms earlier on, but also the coaching capacities like running great conversation and dialogue and questioning, help surfacing insights. And Oliver spoke about being that kind of really useful, critical pair of eyes, supportive kind of person in the back of the classroom. So for us, it all comes back to that. The learning model, I think, is fundamental in terms of the work that we do when we're trying to improve teaching and learning, and that's why it features so heavily in the work.
Can I add something about the learning model? Again, I think it is a bit tedious of me to say so. It would be more accurate, though, to say something like this learning model here is one way in which learning can be described as occurring. So in that sense, it works as a heuristic. It gives teachers a framework, a lens through which they can look. It allows them to reason. If the environment is okay about the attention, you reason around it. So its purpose is to be operational. You're not writing an essay, it's not an academic paper, but actually it's really useful in the field where you are. You can use it. There's no one I know who couldn't use it. Teachers, coach, students.
Oh, Tom, you're on mute.
Classic webinar behavior. I had to mute my mic. There was some like weird birds flying around here, disrupting my attention span. The why section, coming back to it, the bit that really sort of stood out to me when I was reading this, and I really like this section because it really sort of sets the scene for me of what we're trying to do with the book. Was this bit, the Kennedy's problem of enactment. And when I read it, I just thought it was really sort of applicable to what happens in schools. If you look at like part 1, all teachers arrive to the profession with an apprenticeship of observation. Their early school experiences as students form initial frames of reference, deeply held views about what teaching looks like. And these frames shape how they interpret new ideas. If a new approach doesn't align with those frames, it's unlikely to stick, and teachers will default to their habitual practice. And then it moves on from there. But I really liked this as sort of one of the things that teachers do in a sort of observation context, in a peer support context. I wondered whether you had any commentary on this particular section. I mean, I've got the other half of it here as well.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll start there. This is one of my favorites. So this is I think it's really powerful. I'm a massive fan. I know Oliver is too of Mary Kennedy's work, and you hear kind of people talk about the knowing doing gap and what that may or may look like, may or may not look like in schools, and how to overcome it. But really, to overcome the knowing doing gap, or what Kennedy calls the problem of enactment, is you have to understand it. You have to kind of work out where it comes from. And I love that first step. So Mary Kennedy's she's a prolific writer, and so this walkthrough kind of pulls together. It's almost a synthesis of some of her core ideas that are applicable to schools and professional development. But that first one I think is fascinating. It's like no other profession welcomes new members who have already served 13 years, kind of an apprenticeship of observation, watching their own teachers teach, and you only have to be a parent in a WhatsApp group for your kid's school to know that everybody knows how to run a school, everybody knows how to teach, everybody knows how to do it. Why? Because they've been to school, they've been the student, they've been the other side, and so teachers arrive in the profession with these kind of quite stubborn mental models around what great teaching looks like and what effective teaching looks like. And I'm sure Oliver can add to kind of the concept of mental models, actually, because we tee this walkthrough up actually in the why section with some of Oliver's brilliant thinking around mental models. And so the challenge is that, and we talk about this in meaningful coaching as well, which is at the start of this chapter, which is this kind of 3-domain framework that has become quite important to our work, is if teachers are going to enact a new or refined or developed practice in the classroom, they're going to change the way that they do something in the classroom. They're only ever going to do that if they feel it's worth doing, first of all. they only are ever going to do that if they recognize the value that it has to them or their students, and if they really understand it. So you have this kind of personal domain. Oliver mentioned the cognitive domain earlier, and we kind of designed this framework in response to some of Tom's thinking around what we've called politely the 98% problem. And this is that our influence as a leader or as a coach on the time a teacher is doing their job is so limited and minimal. Like, teachers are on their own in the classroom for 98% of the time. And so our assertion is really like, what really matters is what happens behind closed doors when the teacher's on their own, and not what happens in the conversations or the activity that we're face to face in a coach capacity. So to do that, we have to pay attention to their mental models. We have to understand how they're seen in the classroom. We have to explore and surface those kind of, you know, strong, but equally those maybe kind of mental models that are less secure around why certain things are happening and what those habits look like in reality. And unless we kind of spend some time doing that, then we you know, leave little other choice for teachers to work on instinct, to work on gut feeling, and kind of try and feel their way through. And we feel as a profession that we're probably a bit better than that. You know, we can do better than just allowing teachers to find their way. So I think that's a really important one. Oliver, I don't know if that's a good time to come in and just kind of share some of your thinking around mental models.
Yeah, thanks. It relates to the knowing doing gap. I saw a problem over Twitter over the last 10 years. You had so many secondary teachers who admitted that they used to do lots of experiential, engaged activities, you know, and the typical one was, we built papier-mâché volcanoes. I met the pupil 2 years later in Sainsbury's, and all they remembered was a papier-mâché. So we've got all that. And then people got some technical words. It was semantic and episodic. So students remembered the episodic, the experiential bit, but the semantic bits that goes on the board, that just goes over your head. So I think teachers got into this false formula: semantic good, episodic bad. But actually, when you look at developments outside of teaching, and they've looked at how to really get into expertise, how to really get into tacit knowledge more than teachers say they can, because normally it's just, I take the minute, they go, oh, it's tacit in it. It's tacit in it. So in other words, nothing can be said. So there's no knowledge you can get out of teachers, no value. Just leave it to the university professors, because they'll give you a bit of semantics, declarative stuff. When actually, what I think happens is professionals' episodic experiences, what it feels like, what they remember, what stands out, what drives how they're thinking. That's the bit that Matt's been really skillful and committed to surfacing. If you come in the way he said you shouldn't do, you know, come in, observe, project your point of view, do this, that's never going to change. Teachers are never going to change. They're never going to be empowered. They're never really going to enjoy their job anymore. Teachers enjoy their job because it's difficult, but it can be difficult and rewarding if you've got more mental tools to play with. I never saw that before. If I did this. So what mental models are really are causal. I mean, that makes it sound very laboratory. It is cause and effect, but not like a scientist in a laboratory, because we can't handle or we can't exclude all the variables. So we're juggling with all these variables. So it's very loose, more like a historian, because you can't organize history in laboratories. So you're saying, generally, we think this collection of things might cause that. So I've had some conversations with historians, and their models of causation, I think, most closely relate to how professionals in the field, juggling, not knowing everything, having to guess. That's why heuristics are so critical, because they give you a tool to do that. And in a way, they give you more of a tool than this absolute rule that comes out of the laboratory. And that's my theme that I'm really interested in. And that's what I've seen Matt's been so successful in, not just saying, oh, that's interesting, but really making it work and finding the different structures and systems that can make this subtle thing become real. So a mental model is how you think the world works.
Yeah. I mean, I know we can't go into everything, but I wanted to highlight that Kennedy's problem of enactment, just because I thought it was a really good bit of this section as somebody who's like a first time reader of this. It's not something I was aware of, so it really sort of, it stood out to me. But in that section, as I said, you're setting the scene. You're explaining to people, I guess, why this is a good idea, right? And then the next section goes into the how. Okay, the how this whole approach. Again, correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm saying. It's how I sort of read the piece, but it's how it can be implemented. It's how it can be done, how it set up, right?
Yeah.
So in this section, as you can see, you've got another 10 sort of subsections in there to explore, and we're not going to do that. And by the way, anybody listening to this as a podcast, you can check out the YouTube version if you want to see the sort of images to just illustrate what we're talking about here. But essentially what we can see is the 10 subsections in the how section of the Coaching WalkThru's book. Now, the one that I thought was sort of really important in this section, from what I picked out, was this whole idea of the process, the coaching process, right? And I guess when you're starting this journey of implementing coaching in schools, because there's a lot of schools out there who are nowhere near even like embarking on this or considering this, and there'll be many who don't know what this is. And I know that for a fact, from interacting with colleagues within, say, the international teaching circuit, right? And there's a lot of schools in the world where this will be sort of foreign to them. But this whole process, okay, do you both want to sort of talk me through this? There's 5 steps to it, obviously, and I'm happy to sort of illustrate this on screen as well for people watching.
Can I start off first? Because I just want to praise Matt, because we've had long conversations. There are so many factors, and you can organize them, categorize them, and sequence them in so many different ways, and Matt did. And so the highlight of his conclusion is it doesn't look like much thinking because it's so obvious and simple. But actually, that's the proof of all the work behind it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, for me reading this, it was really well put together. Really well, really concise. I felt like I could get a lot out of this very quickly. I thought I could synthesize what was in this really quickly, which for somebody who's quite busy, that's really, really helpful. I didn't have to sort of sit there and read something 10 times to be able to engage with it. Everything I read in this, I understood. It went in. Some of it was stuff I didn't already know. Great. So I agree with that. But Matt, I don't know if you want to go through this coaching the WalkThru's coaching process. There's 5 steps in here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this was like Oliver's alluded to. This was a big piece of work to bring together everything that we felt was happening in schools where coaching was really, really kind of a coaching-based PD approach was really kind of landed and taken off. And really, the challenge here is not to say this is how you must enact coaching week by week. It's what are the stages that a teacher might go through, or that a team might go through, or that a school might go through. And what I really like about how this has turned out is actually, forget coaching for a moment. You could probably apply each of these 5 steps to any type of professional development. Right? It's like, what needs to happen for us to take an idea? Well, first of all, we need to make sure the idea is well informed and we know why we're doing it and what we're working on. So the diagnosis is around, are we working on the right thing? This is really important. Like, one of the biggest challenges around really kind of rigorous and robust and effective PD and coaching based work is time. How do we find time and carve time out of our academic calendar to make this stuff happen? And then when we do that, how do we make sure that we're working on the right stuff? If we've carved all this time out, we have to make sure that there's efficacy to it, and we're working on stuff that's going to make a difference for the students that we're working with. So the diagnosis is it's a really important part of any kind of implementation project. It's like, what are we going to work on? And then once we know what we're going to work on, what problems we're going to solve and why we're going to solve them, what does that look like as a process going forward? So the diagnose and design is the starting point. I should point out in the graphic of this, all of these 5 steps sit on a 6th concept that we refer to as conditions and culture. And the importance of that being that if the culture of your school is not prepared for coaching and prepared to take that leap away from some of those kind of compliance models that are still quite prevalent, then probably none of this will work. So you've got to you've got to attend to the culture first. Then we're in a position where we can start to work out what we're going to work on, and then we kind of diagnose the coaching pathway, and so that phase ends with a goal. We know that goal setting is a really important mechanism. It ends in a goal that we can all articulate. We advocate through the book the power of working in teams, and so can everyone in the team articulate the goal? And this is one thing that we kind of are really firm about is. And this is where sometimes there is a bit of pushback from some of the kind of existing kind of coaching models that are out there. Is we feel that particularly when it comes to a technical domain like instruction, it's a bit unfair to try and coach on something that you haven't trained anyone on, that you haven't kind of supported teachers to kind of understand and to practice and rehearse. It's like, and yet sometimes people see training and the idea of kind of running workshops and training workshops with teachers at odds with the philosophy of coaching, but we see it very much as part of that process. So the second stage is, now we know what we're going to work on and we've got a starting point. Let's train ourselves up on it. Let's facilitate some really good training workshops. Let's enact some of those important features like modeling and helping leaders kind of build confidence in providing models and deconstructing models and exploring how to generalize the successful features of different models into the teacher's own context. And then we go into this kind of real challenge in there, the adapt and apply is, and now let's trust teachers to go and give that a go in the classroom, but also invite them, and this is so important, it's at the bottom of every page in Teaching WalkThru's, invite teachers to adapt and modify the technique into their own context. They have to kind of get their head around, what does this idea look like with me as the teacher in my classroom delivering my curriculum, and me doing it, and not that just what it says in the playbook and not just what it says on the screen, but me doing it. I have to kind of add the details to make it come alive in my own classroom. And that process needs support. That process needs guidance, and teachers need help and time to do that. And all of these kind of fulfill the kind of broader remit of being a coach, being a leader coach. And then you get to the kind of it, once teachers have had a chance to try those things out and to explore those ideas, then you get to the fun bit that everybody wants to do. So you mentioned kind of coaching mutations earlier. I know Oliver doesn't like the term mutations, but where it goes wrong is where people obsess over running coaching conversations. It's just like, it's very shallow just to say, how do we, we're a coaching school, we run coaching conversations. Well, the coaching conversation is the easy bit. The harder bit is how we get to that point, and all of the work and support that has to go in before we get to that point. But once we are there, how do we make sure that isn't kind of I heard Amjad Ali refer to these kind of sessions as moan bonding sessions, like teachers coming together and just moaning, and they love each other for it. They don't, it's like, this is a real hard job. It's really difficult. We want them to be like productive, professional conversations, representative of a profession where teachers are really kind of digging into it, and there's teeth in that process. And it's not driven by the coach. It's a co-constructed process, but the coach has got their hand on the rudder to make sure that it's happening and to make sure that those things are in place and that everybody's got a voice in it. And we're uncovering the things that are working really well and the things that maybe might represent next steps. And then the final element is you've got to see it through. Like if it's a flash in a pan, if it's kind of a walk through a week, which we know doesn't work, by the way, it's like, that's no good, because when is the time to move on? When that habit has been so well embedded that it's not going to drift, that it's a good foundation to be stacked upon, to be built upon. So embed and build is about get the idea in, make sure it's in, and then you can start building on it and kind of developing it from there. So that's the kind of premise behind the coaching process.
That's brilliant. Oliver, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that. It was a fantastic sort of overview of the process, but anything to add?
No, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And obviously, go on, sorry.
Yeah, there's like a meta question, which is, in a sense, I think it would be a bit confrontational for a coach to say it, but in a way they do address it to the teachers. Are you willing to be coached? Which is part of the culture underneath it.
Yeah, sure.
So if you're not willing, then however brilliant you are, it's not going to happen.
That's a really good
the culture you build up leads people into wanting to.
Yeah, sure. There was another few bits. I mean, obviously we can't go through all of this in massive detail, but there was a few other bits in that how section I wanted to draw out. One was on the whole thing of, can coaching happen in groups? Because I know there was a section in there which dispelled the myth of one-to-one coaching. Because when I think about coaching, I'll usually, in my brain, think of one person sat with someone in an office and having that one-to-one conversation. Obviously, there's a huge amount to it, more than that, but that's what you think of, isn't it, in clip art sort of terms? So what? I was interested in that.
Let me first and give you a bit of background. I read a couple of books on group and team coaching. So it's been around in business for a decade. I thought education is always like a decade behind. So they'd already had the practice and they've already made the distinction. And it came out because they didn't have same as in school, they didn't have the time, they didn't have the money, and probably most important, they didn't have the skilled coaches. So better off making it work. And the distinction is team coaching is people in the meeting will meet again and they work together. If you say you had a private group coaching, they come from different schools. It's a different dynamic. And so the advantage of team coaching over group coaching is it seems less personal, more collaborative. They're all dealing with common problems, and it reinforces the view that teaching is essentially problematic. It's nothing but problems. And the problems are nothing to do with you. The problems are to do with teaching. And then when you see that these problems that you may have held on as being personal, because you have a personal one-to-one coaching, you have appraisal, you think it's all me. Actually, that's the nature of the job. And that's the nature of my department. And they have many, many solutions. And Tom really developed that when he saw that it wasn't, trying to have a therapy type coaching one-to-one. That wasn't working on so many counts. And Matt's captured it brilliantly.
But I'll be honest to say, it took me a while to get there. So I would say I was probably a bit of a coaching purist to begin with, Tom. And so when my initial kind of work in coaching was around the real fundamental challenge of logistics when you're implementing one-to-one coaching across a school in a meaningful way. And I was a little bit skeptical of team-based coaching. When I started working across multiple schools, firstly across South Wales, but then obviously latterly with WalkThru's, it's like there's an element where you have to think about what is realistic and sustainable in schools, and what is empowering in terms of opportunities for collaboration and teachers to kind of share their challenges and share the problems and kind of build some momentum, whilst at the same time being very kind of fundamentally strategic around how do we shift momentum at a whole school level. If everybody's working on their own little thing, how do we really develop the expertise to be able to support teachers if I've got 70 teachers all working on their own thing? It becomes really difficult. So we kind of say coaching can happen on a continuum of different configurations. And I think it's a really useful way to think about it is if you imagine on the left-hand side of that continuum, you have one-to-one coaching, and that brings lots of benefits, for the teacher and the students that teacher is working with. It could be an incredibly intense and powerful process, but you're working on very bespoke problems. But it could be very difficult to coordinate that activity against what's happening. We talk about 3-stream CPD. So how do I coordinate the activity of the individual teacher against the team activity, against the whole school activity? And how do I facilitate that in terms of the kind of resources required to provide every teacher with a coach, particularly in a secondary school where I might have different subject disciplines at play and things like that? It becomes really difficult to sustain. So one-to-one coaching, massively beneficial, really hard to implement, really hard to sustain, really difficult to marry against whole school priorities. If you go to the other end of the continuum, right to the right-hand side, you have kind of CPD processes that happen at a whole school level. Really easy to do, right? Really easy to get everyone in the hall and say, we're all doing this thing. Really easy to have everybody in a group because it takes one of you at the front. Really easy to address and demonstrate that you're addressing your whole school priorities because look what we're doing. But very, very difficult to get every teacher invested in the particular thing that you're working on, right? Because teachers will be sitting there. I remember having sitting in an inset day in early days of my career as a young, new, struggling teacher, and I've got kind of kids who are not listening to me in the classroom, not taking me seriously. And the inset day that is my kind of one shot of training was around higher order questioning and active listening. And I was like, I'm nowhere near this point. Like what is investing me in working on this when I'm trying to work on those challenges? So how do you marry those challenges up? cut a long story short, if you kind of migrate into the middle of that continuum, you arrive at teams, right? And Tom has this lovely phrase where he says teams are the default unit of professional dialogue in a school anyway. So let's harness that. And in doing so, let's harness some of the benefits of one-to-one, i.e. we're closer to our common context that makes it feel personal enough. We're sharing common problems. Let's maximize that unit size. We can get momentum if we're all in kind of cohesive teams across the school that serve our whole school agenda. So we can kind of sustain some of the benefits there. And it's infinitely more realistic and achievable logistically if we do that in teams across the school. How do we kind of facilitate that? How do we give that time? And so for us, it's not about saying one is the right model and another's a wrong model. You know, the dialogue for us has always been, it's silly to say that the only way to coach is one-to-one if one-to-one coaching is out of reach logistically to your school. You know, so you have to find ways of making it work. And we see huge success in our work now. This is now our default recommendation for schools. We see huge success around really kind of structuring and empowering middle leaders, particularly around kind of, you know, getting shoulder to shoulder with their teams and running those team-based coaching conversations. And that works really well in reality. The book is applicable to all those different configurations. So the ideas that are in the book are not bespoke to one-to-one or team-based coaching, but should be universally applicable across the piece.
It's great. Just a reminder, anyone joining us now, we're talking about Coaching WalkThru's by Matt Stone, Tom Sherrington, Oliver Caviglioli. And obviously I've got Matt and Oliver with me now. So head over to the Hachette Learning website if you want to pick up this book now. Okay, get over there. It's really well worth investing in, 100%. We've got so much I want to carry on getting through here. One of the things briefly I wanted to touch on was in this how section, you mentioned about non-subject specialist coaches. And that I would imagine is a really common thing across schools. I mean, you guys go into way more schools than I do, but I would imagine that's a really common thing. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on that and any sort of do's and don'ts there, or things that, you know, schools need to bear in mind when they've got a lot of non-subject specific coaches.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this, Oliver, to begin with, if you want. I mean, this is part of Tom's input in the book. Now, the reality is, Tom, it's probably the default is, particularly, you know, in most of the schools that we go to, the default is that coaches will be non-specialists. You know, for lots of reasons, it's you know, highly unlikely that you're going to be able to match every curriculum area with a subject specialist. But so there are two kind of core approaches here. The first is around the disposition of the coach is not to assume the position of the expert, particularly if you aren't the expert. You know? And when we talk about co-construction, and we talk about co-construction throughout the book, you know, a core part of that is respecting the expertise of the teacher that you're working with. So if I'm going into a classroom and, you know, I'm an English teacher, if I'm going into a science classroom, you know, I want to skill myself up as best I possibly can on the science curriculum. I want to give the teacher that kind of nod of respect to say, look, I'm building an awareness and trying to build a sense of your curriculum, but you're the expert. So I'm going to kind of flag things up that are, you know, of interest that we might look at, but I'm relying on you and I'm empowering you and I'm bringing you in to kind of to share the context. Tell me about it. Tell me about your rationale. Tell me about your thinking here. Tell me about the curriculum content that you want students to be leaving with. So that first disposition is like, if you are, as you often will be, and I saw a comment come in there, like so a listener saying they see nothing wrong with this. No, nor do I. I think it's the norm. It's powerful, but you've got to know your role, and your role is not to pontificate on curriculum that you're not expert in, or to assume that you know enough about the curriculum to be able to do it. In fact, that could be quite insulting to teachers when you say, you know, I've read a little bit about, I've seen a few science lessons, so now I can advise you on the science curriculum. It's like, no, what is useful? Highlight those kind of features of learning that are visible or that are worth exploring. And then the curriculum content kind of applies. It could be kind of folded in as the dialogue unfolds. So it's, you know, the fundamental thing around that is that's the norm and that's going to happen. But your disposition of the coach is you're not positioning yourself as the expert teacher or the expert curriculum kind of sage or in this context. You're relying on and inviting the expertise of the teacher in all cases. that's why it can help. Listen, when you are running in teams, and they are curriculum teams by default in a secondary school as well, so that helps. But generally, when you find yourself in that situation, it's about respecting and honouring and trying to get into the curriculum, but really kind of empowering the teacher to kind of reflect on the pedagogical practices that are visible and that are folded into the kind of the curriculum knowledge, pedagogical curriculum knowledge.
Oliver, I don't know, following on from that, there's another section in the how section around sort of training coaches and what a coach needs to know, right? And I know we can't cover all of that in this one conversation, but if you were to pick, say, one or two things from your mind where you think, okay, this is something that a coach really needs to know in advance of coaching. If you were to pick that, if you were to say this is indispensable, right? What were the one or two things that you would pick?
I wouldn't put myself in that position because I'm not close enough. I'd just be pontificating. I'd say, Matt, what do you think? That's what I would do.
Well, that's what a good coach does, Oliver, isn't it?
Listen, I've got a great line on this, and this is from, I don't know if you're aware of Chris Moyes and the work that he used to he does around coaching. Now he's I mentioned kind of standing on the shoulders of giants and kind of influences. He was a big influence for me, and has been really kind to me over the years, kind of supporting me to develop knowledge of coaching. And he probably won't remember this, but I engaged in a Twitter dialogue with him once around what is the bare minimum? What does a coach need? And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something that has stayed with me since. He said, fundamentally, a coach needs to have a genuine interest in helping the teacher that they're working with. And they need to be armed with some good questions to get the dialogue going. And that's it. And I know it's infinitely more complex than that, but what a great starting point. Like, as a coach, it's such a privilege. As a leader, it's such a privilege to be able to, work with teachers to help them develop their practice. And you've got to, you've got to enjoy that. You've got to kind of respect that privilege, and you've only got a right to do that if you are genuinely interested in being useful to that teacher. And if that's missing, I think for me that's a problem. It doesn't matter what your knowledge base is. If you haven't got that disposition, I think that's a problem.
Totally.
I want to say what prompted the work that Tom wrote about coaching in non-specialist areas is Tom. A number of years ago, I went to FE colleges. And if you've ever been to an FE college, they are absolutely fantastic places. Starved of money, incredible array of subjects, A-level law, equestrianism, building. And he went there with that degree of respect and humble, but really curious and honouring their talents and commitments. And then I think that really gives you a chance to reflect on your own mindset.
No, spot on. And I think sometimes a teacher can tell when somebody isn't genuinely interested in sort of finding stuff out. If teachers think that the other person is only interested in very quickly judging them, right, as a professional, then the sort of reaction to that is either maybe going to be defensive or disinterest. Okay, it's going to be like, oh, just let's move on so I can get on with stuff I need to do. Or it's going to be defensive, like, who are you to tell me that sort of thing? Whereas if it's like, and you can't, I don't believe you can make that up, right? I don't think you can act like you're authentic as a coach. I think you need to, and this was going to be my big question at the very beginning, guys, around coaching and teaching is, the whole thing of somebody who is, I always think of Barry Smith, right? Somebody who I've never met Barry, but if I was to pick somebody out from the whole of the people I've encountered over the last 10 years in the teaching world and say that if you plonked Barry into a classroom somewhere, they'd probably be able to carry it through, right? And that's not an argument against coaching. I was just going to say that there's that whole idea of the natural teacher, Now, I know at the end of your book, you talked about different scenarios, and people who get the book should check this out because it's fantastic. You've got, your new teacher, your experienced teacher, your teacher who doesn't want to know, your teacher. But, this goes beyond, in my opinion, the experienced teacher. This is like somebody who's just like innate. Again, it's that debate over, is there just that level of somebody who's innate about it? Like they know something that happens in the room before it happens, like a footballer who sees a pass before they've even received the ball, right?
Yeah.
And it's how much improvement a teacher can make and how they can make that improvement. And I don't really know what I'm saying here. I'm just sort of talking about the things this book made me think about.
Yeah. I've got a couple of things to add to that. So I would say almost without fail, if I'm working with a new school and we're introducing coaching, we're talking about coaching, the central communication, the central message is none of us have completed teaching. This kind of collective endeavor where we're constantly reflecting on our practice, because that's what professionals do, is steeped in the humility to acknowledge that teaching is infinitely complicated. And even if we've accrued really kind of, razor sharp expertise over our career, nobody's ever finished. And it would be arrogant to think that there's nothing I can do that would benefit a single student in a single way in my classroom. And so when we talk about culture, that's a core part of the culture that you're building on. If you've got a culture where, teachers have, reached a particular level and now they're ticked off and they never have to kind of revisit their practice. Tom was really, really pleased that he managed to find a space to capture his tennis analogy in the train and model section.
I saw that, yeah.
And this is great. This is like, I'm not up on my tennis, but it's like Roger Federer, who's achieved everything there is in tennis, celebrated kind of athletes of his generation, turning around to his coach and saying, God, seriously, we're going to work on backhand again. I've been doing backhand my whole career. Like, why do I have to practice that? It's like, Tom tells this much better than I do, but that fundamental kind of desire to be the best possible version of ourselves professionally that we can be in the classroom, that kind of acknowledgement that actually, I'm good at that, but I could be even better. It's like, I think that's kind of that's a core marker, like a green flag for your culture. That's where that kind of thing comes from. I think but you're right. It's a challenge coaching really, really great teachers, because the opportunity to kind of identify and work on areas that could be refined is smaller, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be part of the process. Like but
conversate, maybe going more, and again, I'm just talking of my experience in schools here as a teacher, but maybe going down the more conversational route, somebody like that might sort of appreciate, just being able to bounce some ideas. I think in the book, actually, it's like it says in your book, it talks about how let them talk more, maybe about but you become like the sounding board a bit more. And,
so we kind of mentioned a few times, and this is based on some of Jim Knight's work, is you have this kind of continuum of coaching, which I think is a really helpful graphic. Oliver's captured it a couple of times, where you have kind of this facilitative disposition on the one side, and then the directive disposition on the other, and dialogical coaching in the middle. And the idea is not that you determine Tom Rogers, he's been teaching a while, so I'm going to be facilitative, or Oliver Caviglioli, he's brand new, so I'm going to be directive. It's you have to be flexible and responsive. So if you're working with a really experienced, really brilliant teacher, and you need to be more facilitative because the teacher is kind of trying to get stuff off their chest and trying to run some ideas past you, and your kind of job is like, brilliant, how can I help? You're leaning into that facilitative side. But in the same conversation, that teacher might come up against a sticking point, and they say, well, what do you think? What do you think here? And you're kind of leaning into your directive side, and you're saying, well, okay, this is what I think here. Let's try this. And that's how a dialogue works. I love this idea. I wrote about it in the book, is if you imagine yourself tethered, by kind of a really stiff rubber band onto the dialogical center point of that continuum. And that's your starting point, dialogue. Like, we're talking together, we're sharing insights, we're finding out what you know, we're finding out what I know, we're kind of doing this together. And then when I need to be facilitative, I could do that, but I've got this kind of constant pull back into the center. And when I need to be director, I could do that, but I've got a constant pull back there. I'm not deciding I'm going to go there and stay there, or I'm going to be there from the outset and stay there. And I think that's as relevant to, you know, experienced teachers, great teachers, as it is to new teachers and that kind of thing.
Oliver, I'll ask you this one. Does that then mean that somebody who is young, who has, you know, who's just come into the profession, for example, the stuff we're talking about now, when I was 22, right, ECT, maybe a year or two after my ECT, you know, I felt you know, this is nothing, this is to do purely with coaching. I would have been and was an awful coach because I wouldn't have appreciated. It's the human side, not the teaching side. The teaching side, I, you know, you guys might disagree with this, but you can have somebody who is, you know, we did a show 2 weeks ago with Becky Allen talking about lesson observations, talking about the whole idea of somebody who is the best teachers don't do enough don't do enough of the coaching or the observations or whatever, right, in the system. But the conversation, if you get those conversations wrong, it's, in my opinion, it's high risk, because you can damage someone's confidence. You can really affect their ability to. They might take what you say. If somebody's they think someone's a great teacher, and then they completely hash up one of these conversations and make it really judgmental or whatever, or they just get it wrong, then they're going to take that really bad off someone they respect, aren't they?
Yes.
So, Oliver, my sort of question to you is, and can somebody who's really sort of young and like doesn't maybe have, maybe it's not about age, but maybe just doesn't have that human connective understanding maybe of different conversations, how they work, like can you train someone into that fast, or is that an age and experience thing, or what? You know, do you have to do loads? I mean, I know in the book you talk about practicing on the job with it, which makes perfect sense, but it's yeah, you know what I'm getting at, don't you?
Yes, I do. I think that kind of growing up maturation process can be facilitated, but it probably can't be done so in school. It's too confrontational. Not confrontational. It's too intrusive. It's too personal. So I've known of some British coaching companies who use techniques in coaching where people went along and paid. They knew what they were going to get, and then they applied it. Actually, I think it was in a British car company. They then applied it straight. A normal manager come along, all of a sudden you had these very intrusive coaching techniques, and there were big law cases. So what worked outside of a school doesn't necessarily mean it can work within a school, because no teacher signs up for that, which kind of goes back to my idea about, are you willing to be coached? And alongside that, one of the most brilliant books I've read the last couple of years, called Thank You for the Feedback, is if you look at all the literature on feedback in education, it's all about what the teacher can do. This book, Looking in Business, finds out that when you receive feedback, you notice that people who give it aren't very good. When you give feedback, you notice that people who receive it aren't very good at receiving it. Yet all the emphasis has been on giving feedback. I haven't come across anything in education that addresses the experience of receiving feedback. And I think that's a blind spot.
100%. It's a really difficult one though, isn't it? Because if you're in a fragile sort of situation as a teacher, I guess it's really easy to go down that rabbit hole really fast. If in any feedback, you know, it's like fundamentally you're saying feedback's great, but actually in the moment you're like, I've just had the worst day of my life, and somebody's
there is one solution though, and we've got it built into, which is called 3-point communication. So
Oliver, you're ruining it. It was one of my favorite bits. I thought it was fantastic in the whole book.
So in my course of 20 years, I mentioned this, and obviously I get teachers experience go, oh, I know that, I do that. In fact, I do that with my husband. If I talk to him, if I go driving and talk to him, all of a sudden I'm getting So face to face, anything you say is personal and it increases the emotion. So if I'm talking to you and I'm in love with you, I'm not going to look here. And then all my romantic talk will be intensified in you. Equally, if I'm coming in to observe you, then everything I say, every slight flutter of fear and fragility gets expanded. So the answer is to do 3-point communication, where we're not just metaphorically, and this goes throughout Matt's book, we are side-by-side learning. So you physically become side-by-side, and then when you have the walkthrough in front of you, it becomes, and it's a favourite phrase that Tom's adopted, it's your joint sketchpad. It's like both your minds are together. And when you look at one of these drawings, you personally imagine it being yourself, but you talk about the teaching, not the teacher, which is me. And that depersonalizes it, at the same time bonds the teacher and the coach together, because they've got a joint problem. It's joint problem solving, and they're doing it together.
Yeah. Matt, anything to add on that? I don't think so. Let's move on. We've got loads, right? I've still got, like, how long have I got with you guys? Have I got another 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
We got. There's so much I want to talk to you about in here. But I wanted to move on to the next section, because we've talked about the why section, which was this. We've talked about the how section. And again, if you're listening to this, I'm showing these sort of contents pages on screen. And then you've got the what section. And one of the first bits in the what section is about building trust, right? Yeah. I wondered if either of you wanted to say a little piece on that, in terms of, because I personally, from, my time in teaching, and I'm still teaching in a school now, my sort of experience across all the schools I've taught in, this to me would be key. And I think, you mentioned it earlier on when you were talking about the coaching process of it coming in before. It's almost like a pre-thing cursor to the whole thing. Yeah. But I wondered whether you guys wanted to sort of talk about that at first, like trust in this whole thing.
Yeah, well, I think there's a broader piece around this. So when we talk about building trust, we're talking about helping teachers have confidence in the process that they're going to be a part of. I think that's such an important thing, and this kind of dovetails with some of the other things we've written about managing different accountability tensions across the piece. So if I tell you what I see as probably one of the most pervasive issues with schools when they're struggling to build a coaching culture, is a real conflation between coaching and professional development and the formative processes that are attached with those ideas, and quality assurance, appraisal, evaluation, performance management. And our advice is always to draw a very, very thick line between them. And that's part of your process of building trust. Like, there has to be an absolute transparency about it. Like, my wife's a teacher, and she, some time ago, I remember her school did a round of reviews, like the kind of 3 times a year review process, where kind of everybody panics because it's kind of, fighting over the laminator, all that kind of stuff. It's like these formal observations. It's like, and the outcome of the review was like, for some teachers was okay, you've got things to work on, so you're going to be coached. It's just like that's such a kind of deprofessionalizing idea, isn't it? Is sure. Coaching is a punishment for not being as good as I might have been in that moment in the lesson, and so we kind of think you've got to move beyond that and say, well, we have to kind of find a place for coaching to sit in tandem with those other kind of processes of due diligence that need to take place, but they're not the same thing. So if I'm coming in to support Tom with his work on think, pair, share, because that's what we've been working on, that's what he's agreed to kind of focus on, but I drop into his lesson, and instead of talking about think, pair, share, I kind of give him a bit of a kick in as to why he's so far behind in the scheme of work. It's like, I break that trust. I kind of break that kind of whole kind of unofficial contracting, and it's a big term in coaching, this idea of contracting. We haven't necessarily kind of explored it in kind of explicit detail, but it's implicit is you have to do what you say you're going to do. Tom talks about this all the time in his work, is do what you say. If everybody in the process does what they say they're going to do, so the coach the leader does what they say they're going to do, and everybody's aware of what's happening. The teachers do what they say they're going to do. We trust them. They're going to go on and work on that thing. Then everybody gets on brilliantly, and the process kind of works. The process kind of has a chance of working. But when that's conflated, when the roles or the purpose is conflated, when people say, I've observed you for an hour and then I'm going to do a 5-minute coaching conversation with you, like, that's not coaching. That's not helping anybody. Nobody gets better from the observation. Nobody gets better from being seen. They get better from the support that you put in place afterwards and how you work with them to develop it. And so that particular walkthrough is around some of those ideas. Does everybody know their role? Are we transparent about what's happening here? It's not this kind of secret process that SLT are kind of running out. It's like we're all in it together. There's another big element of kind of we explore the idea of coaching all rather than just coaching some, and that's part of building that culture of trust. Like, I'm not being coached because I'm not good enough. I'm being coached because that's the way we get better here. That's how we all do it, and that's part of that process. That we kind of honor the boundaries, particularly when there are things like video kind of coaching involved. That we kind of, again, we stick to our agreed protocols for doing that, and those protocols are understood. And that it's not a flash in the pan. I think that's another big thing. So the final point that I've written about in the building trust walkthrough is around, you have to foster this sense of permanence in what you're doing. Like, teachers will lose interest in it or lose faith in what you're doing if you're kind of flipping and changing all the time, or you haven't really planned out kind of a system that is sustainable over time, and it feels like everybody's breaking their back to make it happen. And it's kind of, well, now we're losing faith in the process that you're trying to build. So all of that is kind of tantamount to building the conditions and culture in place. But I agree with you. The issue of trust, I think, is fundamental from the outset for any of that to happen.
Spot on. You just brought to my mind, Matt, about the video thing. I actually had myself film teaching in 2008 at the end of my what was my NQT year. And my nan still watches that video now. She's like, when people come round, come on, let's watch the video of why it's terrible though. I can't watch it. It's terrible. But for some reason, I thought that would be a good idea at the time. But I do think that idea is a good one, fundamentally, of recording yourself. And one of the things that I remember that I got out of that was how many times I said, I think it was either, I think it might have been folks. The word folks, come on, folks. And I was saying it loads and loads. And I was like, I didn't even know if I was saying that. And, I think that's really good with the video side of things. And I know in this section, you talk about collaborative cultures. We've sort of touched on that a little bit anyway. But, what is the importance of that whole collaborative culture thing? Because it seems to be key running through the whole book. Yeah.
Oliver, do you want me to come in on that?
Yes, do, please.
Yeah, so, I mean, the walkthrough, I love this walk. This is written, there's a walkthrough called a Culture of Collaboration that I wrote with Nikki Sullivan from Beckford Trust. And if you've kind of ever heard Nikki talk about her work with professional development, she's amazing at engaging her staff into a combined, like a kind of a whole vision of improvement. Everybody wants to do it. This is the way we do it here. And so we work together on kind of just unpicking what makes that culture so effective for her. They have a trust of schools, and professional development is so kind of high on the agenda and so successfully kind of adopted by all of the teachers. It's a really wonderful culture they built there. So when we kind of get into that, it's like, well, how has this happened and why is it important? Well, if we're all doing it together, there's this solidarity of us being a team, and I think that's a massive part of it. Everybody understands why we're doing this, so there's a real student focused kind of starting point. Like, nobody's doing it because it's a power trip. Nobody's doing it because they have to do it. We're all doing it. We're all engaged in this kind of collective endeavor to get it right for our kids because we care so deeply about our kids. We want them to have the best possible experience. And so that starts where Nikki talks about kind of building the sharing the why. So kind of building that shared sense of the why. This is why we're doing it. And then there's this kind of power. And I picked this up from Oliver when we first started talking about walkthroughs. Excuse my French here, Oliver, but you spoke about the lingua franca of teaching and learning, and going back to one of Kennedy's ideas, Tom, from that contribute towards the problem of enactment is everything's so ambiguous in education. The language is so ambiguous. So how can we be together and be a culture, build a culture around professional development if all of the words that we use mean different things to different people. So kind of tightening up the language and having a kind of adopting a language that is kind of universally understood across the school kind of feeds into that culture. We can collaborate now because we're all talking about the same thing. We're all in the same position. Otherwise, it becomes, well, that's not what we call it here. We call it this there. Or in science, we call it this. Or in early years, we call it this. And that just makes it very hard to have a cohesive dialogue around those types of things. And one of the things I really like about Nikki's ideas around just celebrating, just the constant kind of need to celebrate progress and celebrate kind of the work that's happening, and that happens as part of our 5 Ps model. So we talk about our adaptation of Bambrick-Santoy's 5 Ps model. The kind of co-constructing praise points is such an important part, like amplifying the stuff that's working well, but then doing that on a macro scale as well, and say, well, look at what we're doing, look at the impact we're having, let's celebrate this. And I think there's something really kind of really powerful about that type of culture. And it sounds a bit cheesy, but I often talk about this when I'm introducing coaching to schools. It's like, professional development should be a joyful thing for teachers. And I know it doesn't always feel that way, but it should be a joyful thing. It's like an opportunity for us to kind of get shoulder to shoulder and talk about the thing we spend so much time doing. So talk about this one thing we've all got in common, the challenges that we face and how we can make it better. It should be kind of this really empowering, joyful thing. And that's the kind of culture that we're aiming for. That's the type of advice that we've given around kind of what it takes to make it work really, really well.
No, spot on. And obviously this is part of this section, which is the what section. Now, obviously we don't have time to dig into much more of this. We've talked a little bit about conditions and culture and so on. And, there's 6 sections there that you can explore. There's so much to it. It's very, very detailed. So we can't go into it here, but obviously get the book. That's what you need to do. Get out there, read it, engage with it. But one of the things I did want to sort of finish with was this idea of the ways of modeling. How a teacher can model things or should model things with a coachee, I guess. I don't know whether either of you want to sort of engage with that whole bit.
You go ahead, because it's so close.
Well, the modeling piece is interesting. So we've written 2 walkthroughs in the train and model section, because I think it's modeling and rehearsal are 2 of the ingredients that we know are fundamental to effective transfer. We know that they support teachers to take ideas from the training room and actually have a go at doing them in the classroom. They increase the likelihood of that happening. And yet they're probably 2 of the areas that, for lots of different reasons, are probably most commonly omissed from training workshops and from professional development processes. So, it's very unusual, for example, for a whole school inset day to suddenly descend into, now let's look at lots of models together and kind of deconstruct them and work them, and then let's practice it so we get lesson ready. And so it's the 2 walkthroughs that we've offered there are kind of ways of plugging the gap, and they all fit into this structure that we've adopted around theory, see it, name it, do it. We can see can actually be quite a useful physical structure for a training input, including those ingredients and models. Part of the reason why kind of coaches or leaders shy away from models are because sometimes they're automatically equated with me having to pretend to do this thing in front of the room. Like I have to show to do it, and then I'm going to be shot at. So we kind of feel, well, there are lots of different ways to model a practice and an instructional idea, and actually none less than the visual images that Oliver kind of has painstakingly carved out. Like the idea that they provide a static model of practice that teachers can really reflect in and see what's happening and kind of situate themselves into that scenario and kind of deconstruct from there. That's a really unique kind of feature of our toolkit. But models could be scripts, they could be transcripts, they could be video models, they can be opportunities to go and watch other teachers teaching. But all of these are subject to the same limitations. And the core limitation is that models need to be deconstructed, right? And you don't know what you don't know. It could be really, really difficult for a teacher who is not routinely utilizing a specific practice to then go and watch and identify the features that make that practice successful in a model. So the role of the coach is to provide the model, and one model is never enough. So we're talking about multiple models of effective practice, models of problematic practice, models of contextually relevant practice. And then the coach kind of guiding the deconstruction. So there's real kind of cohesiveness to highlighting the things that are making that model successful or useful. And the purpose of having two different walkthroughs, the principles of modeling, is that are applicable to any of the ways of modeling that you select, and you'll choose how to model it, not based on your preference, but based on what is the best way to model this specific content. So you look at the idea that you're trying to represent, and you select an appropriate way to model it. But here's a common practice, Tom, that I still see commonly and hear schools talk about commonly in school, and it was certainly a feature when I was working in schools, was Oliver is struggling with questioning. Tom is brilliant at questioning. So Oliver, go in and watch Tom ask questions. Right? And Oliver goes in and he's watching Tom, and Tom's great at questions, but Oliver doesn't see the features that make Tom's question any better or different to Oliver's questioning. You know, it's not enough just to offload the responsibility of the model. What you need to do is say, right, let's go in together. Let's both go in and watch Tom. And this is where we talk in the Y section around developing professional vision. Let's highlight the features that make it effective that otherwise might be missed. And as a coach, I can support that. But you apply those principles to any type of model that you have. If it's a live demonstration, what are the features? What can you see? Let's guide the kind of deconstruction of this. If it's a video model, what are the features? What can we see? You know, what's making this successful? What's making it problematic? So the aim of those sections are practical ways that leaders and coaches can enact modeling as part of their training input and a part of their practical support for coaches, because we know that modeling is such an important feature of successful professional development, which is often left out for lots of different reasons.
Can I add a couple of points? One's only recently come into my mind, and the other one is a recent development that Matt's been working on. One is, it seems to me, again, it's a meta view. This seems to be the essential problem. When you watch someone modeling something, from my point of view, it's third person. Life always happens in first person. So how do you switch from third person to first person? And I haven't seen anything that's been that explicit about it. One way is the development that it's very recent, actually, since the book. It sounds a bit airy-fairy. Mental simulations is when, and these diagrams as I described that aren't too detailed, so it's easy for you to imagine yourself in those situations. This is really first, that's why it's called a mental simulation, and it's a really viable alternative to physical rehearsal. And as Gary Klein says, when he's working with people in difficult professions, it's in many cases it's superior. So mentally, you go through it, you put yourself in the position, and then, right, I know what it is. Now let's really stretch myself. What's my real intention behind all these actions? What are the pitfalls? And live them, live the pitfalls, go through and hear the world not working according to your neat plan. What's my response? And you can deal with a lot of problems mentally. And there's a lot of research about it, a lot of research. That's a very interesting development. And I thought it might be something just for the advanced teachers or those who've done a lot of work. Yeah. And Matt's been saying it's been incredibly successful early on in their encounter with a technique.
Yeah, so we've kind of run with this. So we talk about it under the rehearsal. So there are two entries for rehearsal, training room rehearsal and classroom rehearsal. And one of the kind of training room activities that we encourage schools to kind of tap into when relevant is cognitive rehearsal with mental simulation. So that kind of process. But if that's too vague or abstract, then teachers are just kind of, blithely reading through things, and they're not really rehearsing because they're not thinking deeply enough to do that. So Oliver's work, kind of in response to Gary Klein's ideas, were how do we capture that? So how do we provide prompts so that we can structure teachers' thinking? And I learned this from Oliver, the idea that this is so common in lots of different professions, but strangely abstract from education. And there are different kind of applications of this. So it might be kind of a pre-mortem simulation. So we're working with the teacher to kind of simulate what could possibly go wrong. We're anticipating and predicting what could go wrong. And this could be a really powerful process. But then you can have kind of like a counterfactual simulation, which is really good. You spoke about how do we make sure those conversations are not judgmental? Well, you take judgment out of it and you start talking about the interesting stuff, which is the teaching. So, you can use these kind of the process of kind of counterfactual simulation to support the teachers to reflect on what happened and why certain pitfalls might have been harder to overcome than others. And so there's an exciting piece of work that we're developing as part of our toolkit now, but it kind of ties into those ideas that we've written about in the book.
Quality. Well, listen, I mean, the last section, which we're not going to really have time to talk about, the last section is the scenario section. So this was the section where, if you have particular scenarios that you want to explore, then you can do that because you'll have, it looks, I think, a bit like that. Yeah. If you're watching this one on YouTube, you can see it. If not, you've got 8 scenarios: new teachers, experienced teachers, struggling teachers, resistant teachers, stuck teachers, large teams, coaching outside specialism, and coaching pairs. So that's something, when you get the book, you can explore those different scenarios of sort of implementation and how you might go about those things. So just to review, listeners, and thanks everybody. We've had 200 viewers on all platforms joining us. It's been fantastic just to see people checking in. And if you've only checked in for 5 minutes, then remember you can watch it all back. You can go back and watch the whole thing. We'll also publish it as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, all the usual places. So if you want the audio version, then obviously go there. But we've reviewed this fantastic book, which is obviously called Coaching WalkThru's, part of the WalkThru series. And we've talked about the why section. We've talked about the how section. We've talked about the what section. We've talked about the scenario section. And that is pretty much the full repertoire of what is contained in this book. Of course, we have done a much skimmed version. For the full hit version, you need to get the book, which is fantastic. Oliver and Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you this evening. It's been really, really good. So much insight, so many good things for teachers and leaders to take away. Is there anything you want to finish off on your final message on coaching in schools? Is there anything you want to share as a final point on coaching in schools or coaching WalkThru?
I've just got one thing. I know we didn't have time to look at the scenarios section. Tom single-handedly authored the scenario section, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it's absolutely my favorite part of the book. It is incredible, and he brings to. It was such a joy to work with Tom and Oliver on the book. Tom and Oliver, but in terms of kind of the field work, Tom brings this kind of real expertise and this grounded kind of reality to what it looks like. So I would really advocate, if nothing else, check the scenario section out, because it's so rich with kind of the real problems that real teachers and real leaders will face in schools, and there's lots to take away from that. So that's my final nod to Tom's massive contribution to this book.
Oliver, anything to add?
No, it's been a real pleasure. I'm just looking at the illustrations of stuck teachers with all the tape around him. It's been a wonderful creative challenge to depict these situations.
Well, we haven't talked about you much, Oliver, from the illustration side of things. I mean, there is a huge number of illustrations in this book. They're impeccably sort of designed and thought out. Some of them are really, really clever. So, full credit there as well for that. Really, really incredible volume of work, I would suggest. It must have taken you a while, no, to do these, or is it?
I'm like a medieval craftsman. When I'm not working, I'm not working, and when I am, it's just like non-stop.
Yeah. Cool.
Oliver, it was an insane process to be part of, Tom, because Oliver is so prolific and so insanely intelligent around how he visualizes these things. For me, this was obviously my first WalkThru's book, but seeing the images come in, capturing the ideas was a real kind of professional highlight for me. It's been an absolute joy to work with Tom and Oliver on this book, and I'm very fortunate to have done that.
Well, guys, that's it from us. As I said, you can catch up on this in all the usual places. We'll be back again tomorrow on Teachers Talk Radio for more for the rest of the week, actually, tomorrow and over the weekend. So thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Bye, everyone. Bye. Oh, should we say where people can get the book? It's on the Hachette Learning website, guys. Go to the Hachette Learning website. Bye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused,